Hi friends, let's understand Microsoft GraphRAG by examining and visualizing the output data. We are going to build visuals like this where we have our input documents and the text chunks, entities and relationships in blue and the communities in purple here. This is what we are going to build. All right. So in a previous video, we built graph index using GraphRAG. The output is a number of files like this, right? There are some intermediate files which you see here, the base ones. But at the time of querying or inference, these are the files which are used when answering the user queries. As you can see, there are a number of files, right? So the communities, community reports, documents, entities, nodes, relationships, text units. So there are 7 files. Okay. So we will see what's in those files, how they are connected to each other, and then how we can load all of these files into Neo4j so that we can visualize. All right. So here I'm just going over all the files which start with create final, just printing the columns in each file, nothing fancy. These are all the columns in each file. Only some of the columns we are going to discuss. The others are not that important. Okay. All right. So at the very highest level, we have the input documents, right? So in a previous video, we have used a document called book.txt, right? We have used only one document. So this file here, it has only one row because it will contain as many rows as the number of input documents. Okay. Since we have only one file, which is this books.txt, it has only one row. Okay. So for each row in all these files, we'll have an ID. And here we have the total book content. So the raw content, right? And the important one is the book is split into multiple chunks. And here we'll see all the chunk IDs. Okay. So for example, here is one chunk ID. Then we see another one. So if you look at the text unit IDs, the length, here we have 231 chunks. Okay. So I'll show you. Yeah. So I think it's yeah. So when we built the index, this is what happened, right? So our book is split into 231 chunks. Each chunk has 300 characters and the final one has about 155 characters, right? So these are those 231 chunks, and here we have the ID for each chunk. So that's at the very highest level. After documents, we have the text chunks. So that's in this file, text units. Okay. So as you can expect, this one has 231 chunks. Again, we are using only one source document. If we had multiple source document, we would have all those chunks. All right. So to map each document back to its source, here we have the document ID. And for each chunk, we also have the chunk ID, which is what we have here, which is also here, so that we can map these two documents. And then we have each text of each chunk, the number of tokens. As you can see, by default, each one will have 300 characters and the final one can have less than 300. All right. And then now all these files are created at the very end so that the mapping connections can be made. For example, after splitting the chunks, we create the entities and the relationships, right? But we need to know each chunk what entities and relationships it has. So that's why all these files are created after building everything, and then we also map the mapping or the connections. So here you will see all the entities which are derived from this particular chunk. Okay, so these are all the entities IDs, and similarly we have the relationships as well. Okay, all right, so let's call it a level 2. Okay, and once we have the chunks, we go over each chunk to create the entities. So in this file, entities file, now we have 172 entities. Okay, so for each chunk we obviously have the ID. So here is the name, chunk name, the type, and this is the description created by the LLM. So during the indexing process itself, we will be making use of LLMs not only to extract the entities and relationships to build a knowledge graph, we also have the descriptions for the entities, the reports for the communities, and also the claims or the factuals or the covariates extracted at the community level, which we will see. All right. Then a couple of things, and then here we have the text unit IDs. Now this entity, Project Gutenberg, United States, they can be coming from multiple chunks, right? Not just one chunk. So that's why here we have a list of all the text IDs. Okay. And for the description, we are also creating the embedding so that at the time of querying, we identify the entities in the user query. We extract the entities from the knowledge graph, and also we use these embeddings to find out semantically similar entities / nodes as well. Okay, so that's why we have embeddings at the entity level. Okay, all right. After entities, we should have the relationships. So here we have the relationships. Now the relationships are between two entities, right? So here we have the source entity, target entity, and the weight, you can think of it as how important it is. For example, the relationship between Project Gutenberg and United States is, let's say, 6 times more important than the relationship between this Project Gutenberg and Susan Shell, right? So this can be derived based on how many times this relationship show up in different text units. Okay, something like that. And we have the description for the relationship, again generated by the LLM, and similar to entities, which are all the text units which have these relationships. Okay, all right. And then we have the communities. Okay, so the communities based on entities. So here we have the community title, which is nothing but just the community and a serial number. So from this book, we have extracted, or the LLM has created 30 communities. Okay, and here we have the community level. Remember, after building the communities, we build the community hierarchies, right? If you think like, let's say this is a geography book, we might have at the lowest level cities as communities, and one level above countries. So within countries, we can have multiple communities, and maybe even higher level, we have continent. Okay, so in similar to that hierarchy, here we have different levels. Okay, and then these communities, which are actually based on the entities, again, which relationships they are based on. Since relationships are mapped to entity, so from this we can infer what entities these communities are based on. Okay, and also you will see the text unit IDs, which is also a list. Okay, so a community can be based on multiple entities, and each entity can be coming from multiple text units. So that's why here we see the text unit IDs as well. All right. So as you can observe the pattern in all these files, we are building these hierarchical information, document, next text units, next entities, relationships. Using entities and relationships, we are forming these communities, and then the sub-communities are hierarchies. So in addition to all that information, we have lot of mapping information between these different files. Okay. All right. And then we have this community reports as well. So for each community, we have a report as well. So here we have the community text. The important one here is the findings. Okay. So these findings are what Microsoft called as covariates or the factual statements. So basically within that community, what are the important the statements and what is their support. For example, here we have this Scrooge's relationship with Jacob Morley as a catalyst for change. Okay, so that's a factual statement. Now we are looking at one community. So within this one community, here we have a bunch of these covariates, and for each covariate, we also have some referencing information like which entities and relationships it's based on, and some explanation which is again synthesized by the LLM. So at the time of querying based on whether it is a local query or global query, for example, if you are asking a specific information about the relationship between these two guys, then we will query at the local level. Whereas if you are asking a question like, okay, what is the summary of this book, or what are the main takeaways from this book, or the main characters, things like that, then we will use the community reports at the highest level. Okay. All right. So those are the files. Now the notes is not as clear to me as the rest of the files, but the notes, they pretty much contain the entities information. So here we have the entities, the title, and the type, again the entity description. There are a couple of variables like which again these graph embodies communities, which communities, etc. they connected. But to me, it looks all the information in these notes is already there in the entities files. All right. So that's in these output files. Now let's see how we can load all this data into Neo4j graph database. All right. Okay. This notebook is not yet available on GraphRAG GitHub, but it's in one of the PRs. I downloaded from one of the PRs. Okay. I provide the link to in the description below. All right. So this is the path where I have all my artifacts, those 7 files, and then just the pandas. We are going to use this Neo4j graph database, and I'm connecting to my local database, provided the username and password, made a connection, and then we are going to read all those CSV files, and we are going to insert the rows in batch. Okay, this is like when we want to ingest large amount of data into a SQL database, instead of doing it in one go, we do in batches of maybe 1,000 rows at a time, etc. Right? So similar to that, here we set the batch size to 1,000. So we are going to read one parquet file at a time, and we ingest 1,000 records from each file at a time. Okay. All right. We don't go too much into details of that, but if you have any questions, do let me know in the comments. So as we saw previously, we have four main concepts, right? We have the documents. From the documents, we split them into chunks, and from the chunks, we derive entities and relationships, and we use that information to build the communities, sub-communities, hierarchies, so on and so forth. All right. So first, let's load the main document. All right, as we saw, they have many columns, right? But here we are reading only the important columns we want. So the ID and title. All right, and then we are going to call this function for each file we are going to ingest. So we are creating a node of type document. Okay, since we have only one document, book.txt, we have ingested one node at this point in time. All right, and then we are loading, and we have not made any relationships. We just ingested one node. Now we are loading all the text units. Okay, so create final text units. We read them. This is what we have. And the important one is here we have the document IDs. Since we have only one document, the document ID is same for all the rows. Okay. So for each text, we have created a node. We set it type as chunk, and then we are creating a relationship between the chunk C, document D. As you can see, document is already ingested, so we are able to access part of. So each chunk or the piece of text is part of that particular document. Okay. Again, I'm reiterating, since we have only one document, all the chunks are going to be part of that one document. But if we have multiple documents, we would know which piece of text is from which document. All right. Then next we load the nodes/entities. So again, read the entities. So with this part, it might look complicated, but it's easy if you just split and go over each line. So yeah, here we have created the entities nodes, and we are also making use of some sort of, let's call it a metadata or properties, like what is its description, the human readable ID, and name, the name of that entity. Okay. And then we want to connect each entity to its chunk from where it is originated, right? So since we already ingested these chunks, here we access those chunks. I'm now making the relationship that the chunk has entity, which is this entity. Or we can make the relationship other way. We can say E is part of C chunk, or E is derived from chunk C. Okay, you can define whichever way you would like. Okay, so we loaded all the entities and made a connection to their root, which is the chunk. And then we are importing the relationships. Okay, so here we have the source, target, so on and so forth. Now, so for each relationship, we take the source, we take the target, and here we are creating this relationship called related. Okay, so these nodes are already being ingested. So that's why in all the previous statement, you will see whenever we want to create a new node, we start with this merge. So this merge is like insert into in SQL. Okay, whereas here, since all these entity nodes already exist, we are not starting with merge, but we take the sources and the entities and we create a relationship called this related. Okay, all right. And then here we have these 191 relationships, and again similar to these entities, we are ingesting some metadata / properties. So for each relationship, what is its rank, weight, the relationship description, which text units it's belong to. But here we are not making explicit relationship. Okay, this text units, it's going to be part of its / metadata. All right, and then the communities. Okay, so we load all the communities. All right, we are going to create a relationship between communities to the text units. We can also make it to the entities, because anyway entities are used to form these communities, right? So merge, we are going to create these new nodes which are called, or which are of type this community, and this part of the code is commented. But as you can see, if we want, we can make the relationship between chunk C to text unit T. Okay, but here we are making the relationship between the communities to the entities. So what we are doing is, here we take the relationship. From each relationship, we find out the start and entity, meaning the source and the target entities, and we are making these two relationships, which is this entity to community. So this entity in community C, the target entity in community C. Okay, so we make use of relationships to extract the pair of entities, and we made the relationship between entities to the communities as in community. Okay, all right, and finally we are importing these community reports, which has the summary of the communities as well as the covariate / factual statements. Okay, so import that, and the important one here is this findings, which has these multiple factual statements from this community summary, right? So we load the community. We are not going to create new nodes. I think to the communities, we will be adding these factual statements. Has finding. Okay, sorry. Here we are creating a new node. Again, this is also of type community, and the community has finding, and these are the findings coming from this finding. Okay, all right. So we ingested all the data. Now going to Neo4j, this is how it looks like. This is the final form where we have our main document, which is book.txt, which is at this center, and then we have all these text chunks, which are about some 250 or something like that, and then in blue we are seeing the entities, and the one in this pink are communities. But before that, let's start simple. So as you can see here, we have 589 nodes, which are of these four types: document, chunk, entities, and communities. Okay, and these entities, they are of different type, right? The entities, they can be geolocation, organization, person, etc. So these 5 are extracted by the LLM, the type. And then if you look at the relationships, we have over 1300 relationships, and we have these 5 relationships. Now let's examine this. So maybe let's start with the document. So we should have only one document. So here we are setting the limit to 25, but it's showing only one document because we have only one node of type document. Okay, and then this document is split into chunks. So here we see chunks. There are more than 25 chunks, but here we have all the chunks. And the chunks, we derive entities from these chunks. So here we have the entities. Now, because the entities can be related to each other, that's why here we are also seeing the relationships, right? Because in entities, these are based on source, target, and a relationship. That's why you saw the connections here. which we did not see in chunks. So there is no connection between this chunk and this chunk. The only connection is they derived from the same source. Whereas the entities, there is an explicit relationship between different entities. All right. And finally, if you look at the communities, so here we have some 25 communities. Now let's start with some relationships. So if you look at part of, now you will see this is our document, which is the input document main book. And then here we have all the ones mentioned with this 300. This 300 is the number of characters in the text document. So these are all the text documents. Okay. So each text document is part of the source document. Now, if you look at one of the document, let me go here. Let me select this. Okay. If I select this text document, you will see actual text. So this is the text of the document. All right. So as you can see here, all the text. All right. Then let's look at, so we looked at part of, let's look at has entity. Yeah. So here has entity relationship. Now the orange ones, these are all the texts, and then we have the entities. Okay. In blue. Now, as you can see, this entity, it is derived, or majority of our text units have this entity Gutenberg. Okay, let me show you. Project Gutenberg. Where is it? Show all. That's the summary. Yeah, so here you see the name Project Gutenberg. Obviously, in this book, this Project Gutenberg is the main theme. That's why many paragraphs, or let's say many pages of this book contain the Project Gutenberg, and from all those chunks or text units, this entity has been derived. And after this, the United States is the another important one. So that's why you will see this is derived from multiple chunks. Now here we are showing only 25, but let me set it to limit. Let's say we have some, I don't know, 200. Now you will see even more connections for these two entities. Okay, let me go here. So this one is the Project Gutenberg, which has the most number of connections to these all these chunks. And probably this one is United States. Maybe let's see what it is. This one is also has multiple of them. So, Scrooge. So Scrooge, that seems to be another important one. Maybe the United States will probably somewhere here, which also should have highest number of connections to the chunks. All right. So we looked at has entity, part of, okay, related. Let's look at related. So the related is simply the relationship between different entities, right? So here, that's why you see only the blue ones, which are all the entities. And then these two entities are related, these two entities are related, so on and so forth, right? For example, if I zoom in, yeah, I have loaded too much, so it's not responding well, but let me do it again. Related. Yeah, I'm just trying to show you one example, but as you can see here, this guy Fred and niece, these two are related, right? That's how the related are. And then we have two more, which I think part of has finding in community. Yeah, so let's look at in community. Now we have communities which are in this pink, and then entities in blue. And because we have entities, obviously we have the relationships. So as part of the communities, we have both entities and relationships, or the other way, entities and relationships form these communities. And finally, has finding, Okay, so here we have the communities, and from each community here we have these factual statements. For example, let's look at one of these. See all. Now you will see the summary, right? So this is one of the factual statement based on this community. Similarly, there are three other factual statements. Okay, so we looked at the nodes and the relationships. Now I want to show you a couple of more queries, okay, or the cipher statements. So with this, what we are doing is, hey, match all the documents, and then the documents which has the relationship part of with the chunks, and provide we are just setting a limit. Okay, now we don't need to set this limit. Anyway, we have only one document, but if you have multiple documents, you might want to set some filters or limits so that you don't lose interactivity when you run. All right, so let me run this. So I should be seeing a document and then a document and chunks with the relationship part of. All right, so we have level 1, level 2. Now let's add level 3, which is entities and relationships. Okay, I'm going back. So this time to the same query, here we are adding has entity. So we are bringing in the entities information also. So let's go back. So we are adding level, let's call it 3. So level 1, 2. Now we should have level 3. All right. So source document, again the chunks. Now this time we have the entities and also the relationship between the entities. Now let's do level 4. So in addition to the entities, now we want to add the communities as well. So copy. Now let's do communities. All right. So not sure why this one is showing. 1 second. Yeah, I think this one. So level 1, book. Level 2, text documents are the chunks. Level 3, the entities and relationship. And level 4, even though it's not level 4 in the hierarchy, so the communities, which are based on entities and relationships, which are based on the text chunks, which are based on the source documents. Okay. All right. That's all for this video. Thank you very much.